Welcome to Reccast, a video podcast series about all things AI in recruitment, brought to you by Recrite.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Reccast, the podcast series where we explore the use of AI in recruitment, looking both at the opportunities, ethical considerations, and pitfalls. I'm your host, Jussi Luhtasala, and with me I have my co-host, Miikka Tuomo. Today we have a very interesting guest as Pil Byriel joins us from Denmark. She is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Identifies, a Danish software company focusing on inclusive writing software. And they've been working on different kind of machine learning and AI models for quite a while to support recruiters in creating job ads and other recruitment related material that is including all, and we're going to be digging into that today. And actually, to kick things off, Pil, would you please tell us a bit about your background? How did you end up in recruitment and HR tech in the first place?
Yeah, thank you so much for the great introduction. I think that's always an interesting question, right? Because how did you end up here? That's always a lot of, it's been an interesting journey so far. So I actually have a theoretical background in organization communication, change management from Copenhagen Business School here in Denmark. Been living across the world, both in the US, Canada, France, UK, and so forth. But, always came back to Denmark as the base and Scandinavia. But I very quickly started working in technology, working with software, working with, had this fascination, especially for artificial intelligence. Back then it was something different than it is today, right? But how the way we can actually scale things and create solutions for the many has been such a fascination for me. So starting working with human behavior research, with eye tracking, EEG, understanding the brain and the human behavior in many ways, for especially consulting universities on how to use that for research to understand how people react when they see and have different stimuli in front of them. And I think, that made me very interested in, especially, figuring out how could I combine that with organizational behavior as well, and understanding how we can thrive and create better workplaces. So I actually went to a company called Peakon, HR tech company as well, not on recruitment, but on HR processes and creating a different experience for employee engagement. They later have been bought by Workday also, both within HRIS suite and ATS suite, of course. But I think that really brought me into this world and into this world of HR and the complexity of what is within HR and where recruitment is a big part of that, of course. But I think, I kept hearing from the people that I were working with to say, I especially remember one conversation, I'm not going to name any names here, but a very large Danish retail company that told me, employee engagement was nice. That's a need to have. We have to, of course, have engaged employees, but the real problem was to hire more women specifically. And we didn't support that at Peakon. We didn't do anything about that. We worked on other things, important things, and I loved that company, and I loved being there. But for me, that was sort of what started everything. And I started reading a lot about it, started really getting into this field of both diversity and inclusion. But I kept coming to this conclusion that it all starts with attraction. It starts with recruiting the right individuals. It doesn't stop there, but it starts there. So recruiting was very natural way there. And meeting my previous co-founder as well with that interest, we really got together to start develop Diverse. And I got in officially when we had the software, ready to actually go out. I have a commercial profile. So, we had to figure out if anyone ever wanted to use this. And buy it, of course, because we are a company, right? So that was in 2020.
2020. So you guys are now 4 years in business?
Yeah, our CDR number is a little bit, or our registration, our company was registered before, because we spend a lot of time as a company on really getting the fundamentals right. So we actually spent 3 years. We founded in 17. So we've been sort of at it for quite some time, but we started getting our first customers on board in 2020, which is, when you think about it now, is interesting timing when Corona or COVID-19 hit in that way. Because then we saw recruitment stuff in many companies. So that timing might not have been 100% the best, but we still managed and have seen really great traction, because companies really do have a hard time how to tackle this. How do we actually create a more diverse and inclusive, I think that's the key word, inclusive hiring process that doesn't exclude anyone, that really and truly can get the best candidates in.
Can you talk a bit about the kind of research and the science you have behind your solution? How have you guys come to the product you have today?
Yes, of course. So I talk a lot about this, actually. I do quite a few talks and quite a lot on this, that I could talk for hours just on this particular question. But to make it very short and a little bit condensed here, what we are looking at is really, and the sort of the fundament that we have created is to look at how do stereotypes come across in society. What are stereotypes? How are they formed? What groups do they affect specifically to a higher degree, right? So there are so many stereotypes, and the step before that is around bias. How does biases really affect our behavior, and what kind of biases do we have? There are more than 179 biases that we have and affect our decision making every single day when we cross the street, but also when we hire the next person on the team, right? Or promote, for that matter, because we have a clear idea about what does a leader look like?
Yeah.
What does someone in sales look like? What is their behavior? And we just tend to want to have the people who look like ourselves. So there's so much theory just on that. And we take it a step further and look at, okay, let's look at how language affects that behavior and reinforces these stereotypes and keep them in place in society, and what we can do to break those, right? And we use technology for that as well, but foundation is really the research.
Yeah. And it's mainly language, I understand, that you guys are focusing. So written content, job descriptions, job ads, and so forth. So that's where you kind of apply your theory and research. So it's kind of via different kind of written text that people interact with your
Exactly. Yeah. So, when we look at all recruitment content, really, so also recruitment emails, any information that goes out automatically from an ATS system to the candidates, also about the candidate experience, really, we see a really big impact, but also on employer branding, which sometimes in HR, sometimes isn't, but still is have a big effect on the NPS scores, on the number of candidates applying, and the general candidate experience.
If you've been active with the product now 4 years, do you think that do you see that I don't know if the attitude towards the diversity has changed during that 4 years of time, or how do you see it?
A lot. I remember when I started having conversations 4 years ago. So we're also coming up on George Floyd, and the whole Black Lives Matter is 4 years ago right now. So it's just since then, before that day, I still had to have conversations about why is diversity, why is it something we even should talk about?
Yeah.
Why should you care about, bringing in diverse team members and building a diverse team, let alone inclusive team, of course, as well, and inclusive practices to make sure they stay. But that was sort of the foundation. Now I don't have to do that anymore. Actually, a lot of the time, people get annoyed if I start talking about the why you should care about diversity, because everyone feels like they know.
They bought into that concept already. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But
so we can go the step further already from the get-go.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I mentioned it in one of our earlier episodes as well, but I think that we attended some global HR events like 2 years ago. Everyone was speaking about DEI. It was like a super hot topic at that time. But last year, in those same events, no one was speaking about DEI because everyone was talking about AI. So AI was kind of taking all the space from the DEI, or that's how I felt. And I think that it's like, it's just funny how quickly things change, or the big topics in the HR.
Is, and AI is obviously a huge topic. I just did a talk on AI in HR not too long ago, and there's a huge, so many people were coming there because of the curiosity. But I think the change that I see a lot is that D&I or DEI used to be its own pillar within HR. It's this thing that we put over here in the corner, and then we work with it as a separate thing. And now, to a higher degree, it has become embedded in all the other topics instead of being its own thing over in the corner that nobody really wants to touch and is a little bit afraid of what do we do with this DEI topic, right? But now it's part of the politics. It's a part of every time when we create our AI strategy or look at how we use AI, diversity and inclusion is thought into that instead to a higher degree. I wouldn't say that we are 100% there yet, but to a much higher degree than 4 years ago.
How well does your kind of a value proposition resonate with the customers? Is it easy to sell your product?
It is easy to sell, but I think, I think it can still be hard as a concept when you have worked with something and written job ads for 20 years to really not understand, because everyone understands rationally, but to really feel that you've been excluding people for those 20 years without realizing, unintentionally, of course, because nobody does this because they want to. But now I need to change behavior because some software tells me to. And where does this come from? I think that can be some resistance that we see once in a while. Of course, nobody likes to change behavior. We'd like to do as we always have done. And it is a new concept, and in that way that language can have such a big effect, but that's also why we're so focused on showing the impact, and the impact is there, right?
That's a good point, and I think that kind of requires also some sort of self-awareness from the person producing text and everything, that you're kind of willing to accept that the way I've written things, the way I write things do create different kind of biases. There is a subconscious bias, even though you might think that I'm open-minded, I'm open to hiring anybody, but still the way you express yourself, way you write, select words. I was just looking at the demo at your site and I kind of understood that, that's true. Selecting these kind of word combinations does kind of unconsciously narrow down the target audience.
It does. And there will be people out there who will sit with this, and probably we all know it, right? Remember the last time we were in the job market? It's been some years, obviously, right? But we probably were at some point in our lives.
Yes.
I were many years ago, but I were at some point. And there was sometimes you would see a job ad, and maybe irrationally you knew that maybe you were qualified. You had the qualifications for it, but there would still be this nagging feeling that, it's probably not for me.
Yeah.
Probably not. It's probably not going to be good, right? So I will never even apply. And that's where, we will never even get the candidates in.
Yeah. And many times the only exposure you as a candidate, that's a good point, have to that company, that role, team, is pretty much the job ad, the written text here. Let's keep it very simple. Often. Yeah, exactly.
We don't have a lot of time with the candidates in the market like it still is today and have been for many years now. I don't like the word fighting for talent and using these terminology, right? But we all want the best people out there. I just think that the way that we see the best people in different industries and different departments is so narrow-minded that it could be expanded, and actually we have a chance to actually hire the best people and don't have to all fight for the same tiny little talent pool that fit the stereotype 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's actually the same thing that we at RecRite, because of course we are a video company, so we talk a lot about using video to talk about the company you have, the environment you have, but that's kind of not our key value proposition. Our key value proposition is still to do the kind of video interviews, pre-recorded video. We do have a functionality where you can do a kind of a company introduction for the job ad, and that is valuable. We use that in our own recruitment, but let's be honest, not many of our customers are using that. They don't spend the time on filming how the workplace looks like, interviewing a few colleagues and stuff like that, which would kind of add more information at the application phase.
Yeah, true. Have you seen that now that it has been recently the AI boom or a large language model boom or whatever we want to call it? Has that changed your business?
No, it hasn't. And I think that today we're very happy that we started out with that foundation, the research foundation, really, that makes sure that the recommendations we give is not based on a large language model, maybe that, whether that is ChatGPT or any of the other ones, right, Gemini or whatever. It's a very different dynamic that that's a huge thing for educating the market, I think, right? Because our business hasn't changed. Actually, it has become more relevant than ever.
Yeah.
Right. So we did a test, or we did a study early on where if we compare, we just use ChatGPT because that's the most widespread model that everyone has access to. Job ads written by ChatGPT took 7,000 of those, and 7,000 job ads written by humans compared, of course, same title, same industry and everything. We even prompted it to be inclusive and write inclusively, right? Because of course, prompting is important here when we talk about these models. But we still found that they were 40% more biased in general towards all minority groups. So within developed diverse, we especially focus on gender, including non-binary, different age groups, ethnicity, so underrepresented ethnicities. We focus on physical disability and neurodivergency. So we have a pretty, I would say, holistic view on what diversity is and those categories. Not that we're done on that, but still it's a lot more than just gender, and we view that. And our recommendation is always to be inclusive, so not to target anyone, not the underrepresented groups either, because that's where we see the best result. But we still found that especially for underrepresented ethnicities, for women, ChatGPT was significantly more biased against these groups, and only 9% more towards men, right? And it makes a lot of sense. And then we can always talk about, maybe we could prompt differently. But most of us don't, right? Most of people out there using it is not spending an hour on prompting before they have a first draft. But what we see is that it makes sense, because that's how AI works, right? That's how the large language models work altogether. What is the most, statistically, that is, the most highest likelihood of the next word coming in line, right?
Yeah.
So that can only be based on historic data, and historic data is biased.
It's about the training materials, and it's about pulling averages from there. You guys are trying to change behavior through software, and what large language models do, they huge training materials, very useful for many cases, but not perhaps this, because then you just get averages from that. That doesn't change behavior. That gives you averages.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But way too many are starting to rely on that. And I think that's where the developed diverse has actually become more relevant now than it was before, because we are actually, if we rely on those technologies, we will reinforce stereotypes much more than we just 2 years ago. Right. So I think that is an interesting thing that still needs a lot of education, I think, because it's been so available, which I love. I love this technology, and we use it ourselves as well. But we then train our own with what stereotypes are. What are these concepts that we have to be aware of, and so we can actually use it to rewrite sentences, rewrite job ads on a different level, to be inclusive based on research, using LM, but based on research, trained with the right data, and then we can actually use it and sort of power up our software. We can also develop more languages faster. So in that way, LM has only done good for our business.
Yeah, that's what I was supposed to go next to, because your model, like we discussed previously, is very language specific. So I would imagine that adding new languages, you don't support Finnish, I don't think so.
Not today.
No. So that adding Finnish, for example, would be a kind of a fairly large project for you guys, because you would need to understand the biases built into that specific language.
Exactly. So when we develop new language, we always have to have locals that are in Finland who understands the cultural connotations that words have, and are trained social linguists, and we will then train them on DI. But now at least it's easier to generate training materials, so data to train the models on, but the training part will still be the same.
Yeah, but we have noticed in many places that creating Finnish language with any kind of AI system, it's maximum result is very average Finnish. So because the Finnish is so, like we all know, it's a kind of unique language compared to other Nordic languages. And
translations from English to Swedish, I would imagine same for Danish, are starting to be pretty good with large language models. But like Mika says, translations to Finnish are average, because the structure
or even below the average.
Because the structure of the language is hard. It's hard for Google Translate. Anyway, and I kind of understand that, if it's a big project, you need to have the market potential. So do you see differences? Let's say English is such a widely used language across the world. Do you see differences within the language group? So, people in UK will use English differently than people in India or US or even here in the Nordics.
Yes, that's actually very interesting. That's something we've looked at, and that we can, that's where data is amazing. So in our software, we have, thousands of job adverts in, of course, from all over the world. Right now, we cover all continents, whether that's US, Australia, UK, and can really see the differences. But of course, then we also scrape publicly available information where job ads is a big part of that. And we see a big difference when we talk about certain things. It's the same biases that tend to, that's interesting, right? For an example, for a sales position, we see that extroversion is something we always value, independent of whether I'm in the UK, India, Australia, US, or wherever I am in sales, you should be extrovert. That's a pretty, the sort of, the stereotype about how you should be is the same, but we use different words to reinforce that bias depending on where we are, which is pretty interesting. So of course there's some localization always to this way of using language. That is really interesting, and I think that is something we're working on publishing more on as well in terms of those insights that we have.
Yeah, and then of course you also have the kind of industry-specific lingo that might be, that's not related to any geography or anything, but, within a certain industry, there are certain ways of expressing things. And me having worked for American tech companies, the same lingo seems to spread over from there to other places, which doesn't kind of work perhaps in the other industries or something things like that.
But it's actually interesting as well on that one, because we set out to explore that. Right. And we actually did an analysis showing that when we just look at all the different industries, our expectation and hypothesis was that we use significantly different language in different industries. But that's actually not the case. The language in industries are very similar, but department wise, it's very different. Mm-hmm. So when you hire engineers or, whatever that is, it's very different lingo than when you hire for a sales position. But the sales across industries is more like than the departments, if that makes sense at all. Which was a pretty interesting finding.
Accountants use same language across different industries and countries. Exactly. So it's kind of their way of talking.
Exactly.
If thinking of a recruitment, what do you think that are the biggest challenges at the moment in the recruitment? And if I know that you are based in Denmark, but it can be like universal challenges or Denmark specific or whatever.
There's a few. For me, just if we go back to also looking at job adverts, I think the biggest challenge there is that every company right now, some companies are trying to go away from using CVs to be more inclusive and everything, but everyone is still relying on the job ad to attract candidates with, and that is of course sometimes with videos, sometimes it isn't, but the job advert sort of as an attraction is something that everyone is still relying on in my experience, but nobody is trained to do that job really, really well. Very few, but a lot of people are put to do that job. Mm-hmm. Very often it's a leader that takes an old template, maybe it's even a few years ago or old in that way, finding from a different template. Then they're sending it to an HR business partner or the talent acquisition manager, who tends to be, when you sit with that job of perfecting a job ad, tends to be slightly junior in their role, but hasn't had necessarily the training on how to write a job ad. So we are relying on such an important, we all agree that the biggest challenge can be to find the best talent, but we rely and we don't put enough effort into actually creating the job adverts that we tend to rely on for attraction. Mm-hmm. Of course, sometimes we have outsourced or, when we have sourcing as part of attraction built in, but very few large enterprises have that today. And if they do, they tend to outsource it as well. So I think that one of the biggest challenges for that is actually that we post and we put too few resources into recruitment efforts and into the attraction of actually creating the good job post.
Yeah, and even expanding from there, I'll let you talk about the other stuff in a sec. But even expanding from there, because I fully agree, and even a step before the job ad, you have a kind of a job description. What is this role about? And when working with a really good recruiter, what they first start to do is to challenge your job description, which is what they're supposed to do. You know, are you really looking for this unicorn that does this and this and this, and then you're only willing to pay for this money? So, you know, once you have that good dialogue with somebody as a hiring manager, which I've been quite a lot, you need to find somebody to have that dialogue with. The job description becomes much better, and then based on that, like you say, then you can take it to writing a job ad based on the role description.
Then we actually had a discussion with Patrick Rehman in the previous episode about that. Quite often, also the recruiter can be quite junior in the role. Exactly. So if we think of that whole like a chain of things, that you first have like a 5 years old job ad that you will use, and then no one is challenging it. No one really knows how to write the job ad. And then there might be even quite a junior recruiter doing the first screening or so. Yeah. So that's actually we know how important the recruitment is, but it's given to fairly junior and not that professional or experienced doers actually.
Yeah, and you usually, typically in many companies, you do get the senior people involvement, but that comes at the end of the process, which when you have narrowed down the funnel, and then you kind of don't know what you're missing at that stage. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think, you know, the investment there and just the it's been done the same way for so long, and there's very little sort of innovation. I see more and more trying to do blinding, CV blinding for becoming a more inclusive, but still, you know, no one really doing it. So I think the resources spent there. I think companies should dial it up a bit to really invest if we're serious about wanting to attract the best talent, and if we really believe that we are so depending on attracting great talent and the talent that we can have and maintain and of course make sure they don't leave. It doesn't make sense the way that it's done today, in my opinion. Right, and let alone that, you know, what we work with, bias and creating that inclusive process. We don't even give an opportunity to so many people who could be such a great addition to our companies because, you know, we have put in and either we don't do the role description first, or if the role description is not done or is done very stereotypically, if you already there is describing a very stereotypic profile that you need, it doesn't matter with the job ad. The person will never be hired in the first place, right? So that alignment and that sort of best practice, there's a lot to do, I think, in recruitment.
What do you think that would be the best way to start if thinking of an organization that, well, most of them are probably kind of aware that there is biases in recruitment and in organizations and so on, but how would you advise organizations who haven't done active work in that sense? How should they start approaching the whole topic?
I think they should look at the data. I think sometimes we have experienced that even companies can come to us looking for a quick fix, and there isn't a quick fix. We are not a quick fix. We don't fix for the whole organization to be more inclusive if they don't have anything to support it with, or if they don't know their problem. So companies have to know their problem. Do you have a problem attracting people? Do you have a gender gap, for an example, in your recruitment? Often companies don't know because they don't measure.
Yeah.
Right? If they don't measure the funnel, they don't know who got, you know, do we have, let's say, 50-50 gender split, or in Europe, it's very hard to measure anything else than gender, unfortunately. But there are ways where we can actually measure the gender split in the initial recruiting process. Of course, that number should never get to the recruiter to use in the recruitment process. That's one thing. But if you don't know, how can you make a decision on the solution?
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of and develop diversity is not always the solution. It often is, luckily, but it's not always the solution, right? And how can you know if you never knew your problem in the first place? That's the way to start, in my opinion, and then making a decision on the solution. Is it training that we need? Often you need some training, but you shouldn't just do one unconscious bias training a year, right? That's just simply not ambitious enough, right? If you want to make a change. So you need many actions and many sort of solutions that play together to solve the problem.
Well, kind of starting to head to the end of our episode, a lot of interesting discussions, but having quite a bit of a more wider view, how would you advise HR professionals in approaching AI in general? What kind of things should they take into account when working with AI? I think we're talking about our target audience, European, Nordic HR professionals.
I think it actually goes back, there's two things I would advise everyone. I think it's so easy to be wowed, or to go for developing your own, but that's your own internal model, to sort of train that on your own internal data. But I think two things. What is your problem? Do you have a problem? Where do you have data? If you don't have the data, even if you have the problem, but you don't have the appropriate data to train it with, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, right? And on the other hand, if you have the data, but you don't have the problem, it doesn't matter either. So I think that, but I see that all the time. I see, we can train our own model on job ads, for an example. And then we have customers coming to us, can you please, provide us all the words that you're biased? Because then we want to take that into consideration in our job ad, whether that's a creator or something like that. And of course, we can't do that, right? And they think they can prompt their own LLM to be inclusive, but it's not about prompting. The LLM can never be inclusive, never. I will never say never, but with what data they have internally in creating their own LLM, right? It cannot today be inclusive. Let me say it like that. No matter how they prompt that. And I think that is an education part, and that is something that maybe it's because, within HR that there has to be more focus on. If you have a problem, if you have the data to train it, LLM is, using AI is the right solution, but AI is not always the right solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because we get that question quite a lot. Does Reccast have an AI? And then it's okay. What would you like to do with the AI? I don't know, but I just want to have an AI. And it's like, well, you need to know what to do with it first, not just that it.
We have AI features like virtual backgrounds, which has nothing to do with LLMs, but the way we produce virtual backgrounds to our videos is on AI. So very small example. So it's exactly that. What do you want to achieve?
Yeah. Exactly.
To wrap things up, what do you think? Will recruiters be needed in 5 years' time? Or will they all be replaced by AI?
I think they will definitely be needed. I think it will be different. I hope it will be different. I hope they don't have to do all the manual things that they have to today. I hope a lot of the tasks that recruiters are sitting with today will be automated by AI, and so that they can actually focus on what they're really good at and what humans are really good at, to have that interaction. I see that myself when I hire. If it's doesn't have the human touch, I lose candidates, good, especially the best candidates in the process, because they don't want to be hired by AI.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think for sure, but it will look very different. And I hope that it will interrupt it. The whole recruitment, way we do recruitment. I really do hope that.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of the process can be automated. A lot of things can be faster, but then the human touch is still needed, and it's more about the actually selecting the people and doing what the headhunters do today to wider audiences, but with more efficiency.
When I talk to recruiters today, they're all so busy because they have to focus so much on that time to hire or get a certain amount of hires through every month. And I hope that number shouldn't go up. I think it's also about that. Of course, that number, just because we've become more productive, we should focus on, adding the quality that we humans can, but not just getting the number up either, right? So it will be interesting to see how the increased productivity that AI will come with, because I do believe that is what will happen. How that will be handled by the businesses as well. Will it just make the demands higher and make you run even faster, or will you actually allow people to use the expertise that AI can't do? And critical thinking, I think that is going to be a huge thing. That just AI can't do that. That's what we humans can do.
Yeah.
I think we can start to wrap things up. It's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you, Pil, for joining us and bringing your insights on this topic. Thank you, Jussi,
Thank you
for joining us, and thank you for listening for this podcast or watching it. And please subscribe to this podcast in the podcast player of your choice, or follow us on YouTube, follow Reccast and LinkedIn to know more what is happening, and probably take the Develop Diverse to be followed as well in social media channels. Thank you. Bye.